I want to say what an immense pleasure it is to be standing here in this place and looking at all of your faces. I remember the call from Marie on that Saturday, and the awful panic, terror, this feeling of missing somebody who you couldn't imagine missing. And here we have a chance to be here together, to listen to each other's voices tell the story of this remarkable person. And it's a real joy to be here, and thank you all for coming. I want to thank particularly Marie for coming and listening. I have the honor of putting her up at my house, and it's been just marvelous, Marie, having you here and having the stories and getting a chance to be a harbor. For those who haven't signed the guest book, that is, I bring it up after Marie because this is the way she can help remember all of us being here. Aaron Zorn, who's done a huge amount of work to produce this, all the things we're going to see today, and of course was the bass player for the Greylock guys. He is collecting, so this is the director's cut, if you will. He is putting together a really wonderful work. Whoever's got material that they would love to share with Aaron, talk to him about it after this is all over. Next, we have a program which is rapidly developed over the last 12 hours. We have people who are going to speak. For those of you who are going to speak, just make sure you know where you're coming in. I will, of course, announce you. And for those who are not listed as speakers, I don't want to have anybody feel as though they'd like to say something and not be heard. That's why we're here. We're here to hear the stories that all of us have to tell. You know, to have this breadth, this is not just IT people or the news people. This is Merl's life. And if you've been in Merl's life and you've got something to say, we are thrilled to hear it. Now, we are going to start off with saying, would everyone quiet their electronic devices? I thought it was mine, actually. So off we go. Aaron has put together a marvelous program, and he is going to, we're breaking up the tale into 4 parts. And part 1 is the early Merl.
We had Tim do our intro, and now I was asked to play some music, okay? Merl's music. And I hope this is, no, that's not the right music, sorry, thanks to Merl. Okay. We're going to play Merl's first hit record, which was Amazon. Okay, and apologies for, this is when the Doors were very popular. What year was this, Bill?
70. Summer of 70.
In the 70s, summer of 70?
Nobody saw me, I was a white man flying on the iron shore. For that new rising. She showed me her culture, the reason was Spartan, the heroes of an ancient day. I'll never forget her as long as she's far, far away.
We have an overlay of another Merl recorded section for some reason. So you hear Merl's voice in the background of the recording.
A savage by command. The picture be exiled, giving yourself to a man. The wilderness father
soft moment. Okay, now we're going to go back and start this puppy again. Okay, so this is the intro version. Good. Okay, so the way this is structured. Okay, so the way this is structured is our team put together 4 sessions: early Merle, New Jersey and Tucson, and then University of Arizona Wildcat Star Citizen, and then the individual theater, and then the Crossword Puzzle Business of Marie. So first up, we're going to have a couple of photos of Merle from those early years, and then we're going to have some speakers share some remembrances. So first up in New Jersey, Merle was born and raised in New Jersey, and there was an article in South Jersey Magazine in 2013 that talked about how he first got into music. And he got into music by going to farmers markets with his dad, Sam Sr. His brother is Sam Jr. in the room, but we'll see Sam later. Okay, so again, you'll have lots of time to read this at your leisure. We're just going to skip through and show you some interesting childhood photos thanks to Sam and others.
He's the little one, Merle's the little one.
Oh, yeah.
He's the
So you see Sam, then Merle, then Sam. There, it works. Okay. So Doolin Middle School here. Okay. So spelling champion and chorus. Then likewise 3 yearbook photos from Catalina High, 66, 67, 68. And then Merle was a cartoonist also. And in addition to, I assume he had also gotten some awards we'll read about later or hear about later. Merle also formed a band called Greylock Mansion, and we have lots of material on that. That's what we talked about at some point, and it's also in the big PDF. So it was one of those first tribute bands in the sense that it looked and sounded like the Doors, Iron Butterfly, Deep Purple, all those heavy rock bands, and it also had several hours of original material, which was very unusual at that time. And so we have a compilation of that music coming out. We're all on the right, correct. So there's sorry, slip the hand here. So Merle was prolific as a writer, not just as a screenplay writer, as a crossword puzzle creator, but also as a songmaster. And he wrote many, many songs. And KTKT here in Tucson, we were number 9 in one summer with the Chicago and Roger Stills National. We won't tell you how we got there, how many cousins we sent in and asked others to buy the record. And it gets onto the chart, but once we got onto the chart, it was self-sustaining. It was great. So now we're going to go pass it back to Tim and have several speakers give us their remembrances of this period of early Merle.
And we're going to start off with Sam, his brother. If you keep generally in the same area.
Okay. Well, Merle and I were born in Audubon, New Jersey, you heard that, to Granville, Samuel Regal, and Evelyn Seppi. Our dad was one of 7, and my mother was one of 9. Each of them, or several of them, mass-produced. We figure that we're related to most of South Jersey at this time. If you're wondering why they named their firstborn Merle Harry, Merle was one of my dad's brothers who was killed in World War II. Harry was one of my mother's brothers who had died before Merle was born. So that's how they came up with that. Merle had a gift for excelling at things that interest him. We owned a Hammond organ, and he played it every day. He was an avid reader and liked solving crossword puzzles. Our mother used to say that she checked on Merle whenever he made a noise. And she checked on me whenever I stopped. Our parents divorced when Merle was 12, and Mom fiercely packed us up and moved us to Tucson in 1962. She was in search of a better life. I enrolled at Blendman. Merle enrolled at Doolin. A few years later, our mother married Mark Osborne. He was blue-collar and mechanical. He worked at the copper mine. Sometimes he worked days, sometimes he worked the swing shift. Many of you remember him. He mastered the colorful metaphor at an early age. Mark was the antithesis, sorry about that, of Merl. Mark saw everything as black and white. Our world was much grayer. So rather than debate with Mark on a daily basis, Merl and I arranged our schedules so that we would be out when Mark was home and awake. I did everything but sleep at the Vanovers. You don't know who they are, but they were my home away from home. They had 4 kids roughly my age, and their mom was always home. I understand that Merl was practically adopted by the Carters. That was his solution to our home life. Now, here are some of my fondest memories of Merl prior to when all of you met him. I remember when the radio in Mark's 62 Bel Air worked. This is the car that Merl drove, and if you knew him back then, you remember that 62 Bel Air. Mark disconnected it because Merl always left it on. I remember when Merl organized a cartoon festival at the Loft Theater and flew in Bob Clampett of Beanie and Cecil fame as the keynote speaker. It lost money, but it was a great show. I remember when Disneyland turned 20 years old and wanted newspapers to write about it. So they invited a writer and a photographer from all the newspapers to come out and spend a few days in Anaheim, all expenses paid. Apparently, everyone else was busy because I was Merl's photographer. I remember when Merl bought a Leslie amplifier that was capable of blowing the windows out of our house. Each Halloween, we parked it at the front door and scared the bejeebers out of Halloweeners as they rang the doorbell. I remember when we drove to Eloy, and I think it was Eloy, it might have been Casa Grande, one Sunday morning to pick up that Leslie and the rest of the Greylock Mansion equipment stored in a courtroom because Merl blew the engine in Mark's truck coming home from one of the Greylock Mansion gigs. When Merl left Tucson, we didn't see each other that often, but we were still very close. Conversations picked up right where they left off, even when they were 6 months apart. Ironically, one of our last conversations was about health care. Who knew? There's few people in the world who can change your life. Merl was one of them. 65 may not seem it, but Merl was in his prime, and he was taken from us too soon.
Another of the voices from that period was Steve Kelly, who was to be here, but at the last moment threw his back out and couldn't. And Tim Janes is here, yes? Tim Janes is going to give it its proper dramatic content.
And I'll even try to do it without artificial amplification.
Well, none of us are amplified. None of us are amped, sir. But if you do it from here, then you will have it on tape. This is not for amplification. It's for the tape of the program.
Who am I to refuse being on stage?
Yeah.
This is from Steve Kelly, who is a junior high school and high school friend of Merle's. And as Tim remarked, he couldn't be with us today, but sent these thoughts. Merle was a pop culture prodigy and sponge. He absorbed all kinds of TV shows and movies, especially sci-fi. Even at the age of 12, he could reel off names of actors, writers, directors, plot points, you name it. He was familiar with all major Hollywood composers and loved Bernard Herrmann. As do I, actually. He knew every Warner Brothers cartoon and could compare and contrast Fritz Freleng and Chuck Jones. Now, a typical hardcore fan might know that Carl Stalling wrote music for Warner cartoons. Merl knew that Stalling adapted the most familiar pieces like Powerhouse from Raymond Scott. Toward the end of 8th grade, Merl announced that he would be moving over the summer. His mother, Evelyn, had accepted a job at a hospital in Long Beach. After he left, we swapped a letter or two a couple of weeks before, and then a couple of weeks before school started, Merl called. We chatted briefly. He asked if I could put Mom on the phone to talk with his mother, and Merl was unhappy and wanted to move back to Tucson to be with his friends. Evelyn, however, was committed to her job. Could Merl live with us? To their credit, Mom and Dad took Evelyn's appeal seriously. They checked with the school district about the legality of enrolling Merl. Mom and Dad finally concluded that while Merl's presence could change family dynamics, they were mostly concerned about the ramifications of serving as legal guardians. Mom called Evelyn and informed her of the decision. She understood. Then, not long into the school year, Merl called. He said his family was moving back to Tucson and life resumed more or less as if Merl had never left. Our freshman year, Merl noticed that the Scholastic News magazine we got in world history class accepted crossword puzzles from students. Each issue had a theme. Merl looked ahead and saw one that would focus on Australia. That Saturday, Merl announced that we would create Aussie-themed crosswords. We set up a card table in my living room, opened up the encyclopedia, and got to work with gridded paper. I had never made a crossword in my life, and rarely attempted to even solve one. Naturally, the magazine chose Merl's puzzle. But the magazine by then had already had an Aussie puzzle due to its early deadline. They would save Merl's puzzle the following year, his very first sale. That's it.
And next up, it is going to be Larry Lorenzen.
I met Merl in 7th grade at Doolin Junior High. We were in the same homeroom, the 7-7s. Even then, he was a clever, creative character, a wordsmith with perfect penmanship and a New Jersey accent. He sang in the choir and was runner-up in the school spelling bee. We were good friends, but didn't come close until at Catalina High School. He asked me if I could arrange for him to get into the band room. He knew I played oboe in the orchestra and thought I might be able to get access to the piano. I didn't know he could play, so I was curious. I let him in one day at lunch and was surprised to find out how good he was. He began to play some tunes I'd never heard before, and when I asked him what they were, he said, "I wrote them." This piqued my interest since I was a novice rock guitarist with myself at the time. And when I asked him what the chords were to these songs, he said, "I don't know." This really surprised me since these songs were so good. But Merl had, and I thought the composer must know some music theory. But Merl had something just as good. Merl had an ear. Anyway, I gave him a crash course in chord construction and terminology, which he quickly assimilated, and he began teaching me his songs. I remember him showing me a newspaper clipping from New Jersey that featured Merl as a pipe organ wunderkind, and so that explained why he was so good at the time. This led to many nights at his house where we worked on his songs. We learned other pop tunes at the time and made up our own comedy commercial skits, as we were both big George Carlin fans. We recorded these on his tape recorder for our own amazement, and eventually We added a drummer that I knew from marching band, and we formed a band called the Krell. The name being taken from the lost civilization of a 50s sci-fi movie, Forbidden Planet. By the time we began classes at the U of A, we had added Aaron Zorns, our third bass player, and Bill Ball, our second drummer, and Greylock Mansion was formed. As many of you know, Merl had an overworked sense of humor, a real jokester. At Catalina, there was an ongoing contest to see if the writers for the school paper could sneak a headline with a double entendre past their faculty advisor and get it published. After many failed attempts, they were successful when they published the story about the number of boys with perfect report cards being greater than the number of girls. This was a rare occurrence, apparently. The headline read, "Boys top girls with straight ones." Some of you Catalinians may remember that. I don't know if Merl wrote that, but I remember him being very proud of that accomplishment. And there's a gag that my family has become real tired of, or of which they've become very tired. If I can do my grammar properly. I'll go up and open the door and seemingly hit myself in the nose, but actually the door bounces off my well-placed foot. That's a slapstick gag I learned from Merl. I still do it today when I think there's somebody new around. And when I go to a restaurant and put my name on the waiting list, instead of saying Lorenzen, I say Flusp. That way the greeter will spit into the microphone trying to pronounce that name while we all snicker. I learned that from Merl. Flusp. And I remember one day when I showed up to pack up our amps for a gig, Merl had rewritten our entire song list with sound-alike words. They were all pretty funny, but the only ones I can remember now is Born to Be Wild was Barnaby Wild. And the Iron Butterfly song, Most Anything That You Want, became Mozambique Dingbat Chiffon. There was so much of Merl go around, but this is the piece of him I knew and loved.
And the last of the childhood memories is Bill Ball.
My first year as a freshman at the U of A, 1967, I walked in to a music store. I was looking for ads that were asking for drummers to join rock bands. And I checked everything out at Chicago store and there was nothing. And then I went to Musicland, and in all of these scribbled things, there was the most amazing printed handwriting that I'd ever seen. I didn't know you could write that well. So I looked at some of the others, and they had experience. And a couple of the musicians I knew of that were really great were in some of these other bands. And so but I kept looking back at that printing, and it spoke to me. So I called Merl in '67 and that fall, and we got on the phone, and I thought phone calls were things that you gave single sentence, chopped little messages, and you were done. 3 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes. With parents, if you weren't at home, it might be 6 minutes. There was a knock on the door of my bedroom, and my father peeked in and said, "Do you realize you've been on the telephone for 4 hours?" He wasn't exaggerating. When I talked to Merl, we found out that we had these parallels of all the same groups we loved, and we got hung up on one idea, and that was things that you do for their own sake. Things that are just so much fun you can't stay away. You don't need money for them. You don't need fame. You just like the whole heck. That's not the word we use, but anyhow, that you just love this thing. And one of his was playing music on pianos, organs, any type of keyboard he could get near. And one of mine was going back and playing my little tiny Gresh set and playing along with records and dreaming that I might be in a band someday. And so at any rate, when we met, it was not till 68. It wasn't the fault of that phone call or anything. It just took a long time. I had this little idea, being born of a school secretary that ran elementary schools, and a YMCA director, of being into public service and doing things right. And they had just added a drummer, and neither Merl or I wanted to throw somebody out. So we corresponded, but a sophomore named Fehrenbacher played drums in Krell until he decided this wasn't something he liked that much. And I get a call, I've got an opening now. And so I went over and met Merl, and we sat down and played a little bit on Fehrenbacher's drum set. And when I finished, he had this quizzical look, and then he thought for a second, "You play drums like a ball of fire." Well, thank you. And so, I'm following a thought here, bear with me. Ball of a fire spoonerizes, that's when you switch the first sound, into bill of fare. I guess it does. Well, and then your name is Bill Ball. Bill of fare, ball of fire, Bill Ball. I can make a puzzle out of that. Yes, I suppose you can. Well, having played music and written tunes with and done stuff with Merl, I ended up being a single parent of somebody that can't be here today, but she's up in Phoenix. And so I had to tend to having health insurance and some things. And so Merl had met Scott Carter and was working for the newspaper, and we still had the band, but eventually he got a chance to pursue writing. And I don't know how many of you know, but Merl really had a desire to do one of two things in addition to play music, and that was writing a novel. And he started something called Graymonger Rides to be his first novel, or make a movie out of that. And so that was another thing he could pursue. And then there was the crossword puzzle thing, and he didn't think you could make money on that. And as Larry and I were together, and Farrell Wymore, the second guitar player, Farrell, where are you? This is Farrell Wymore. He plays on the second kit we had that was going to be here. But at any rate, I could just take the rest of the day talking about little thoughts and ideas. But what I wanted to close on, I will write a lot of things for our website. But what I wanted to close on is my dad brought me up to think it's not how much money you make. It's not how famous you are. There's only one thing that really counts. It's to be a good person. You gotta keep that your entire life. Merl could juggle. He could do things with words. He was the best puzzle layout constructor. Nobody could match to him. And then he came up with a new thematic way of doing it but he also, if he chose to, could have been a famed composer with one of the best lyricists I've known, and he's right up here, Hal Robbins. And so I'm going to stop with the thought that with all his fame, Merl never changed from the partially insecure person I talked to in '67 till 2 days before he got pain in his abdomen. He was the same person. Merl was a very, very good man. The talent was everywhere, too.
Thank you, Bill. Which brings us,
Sorry, we're gonna play one other song. So this is Red On Legend version 2, another hit record some year, like 72. One of Merl's favorite songs.
Every time I see you rolling, I can't believe you're gone. Never to come back no more. Now right now, I'm in love. Long as I don't go over my shoulder,
So Merl had well over 4 hours of original music, which is amazing. Instrumentals, vocals, everything, lyrics. Okay, so we're going to continue on, Tim, with...
this would be a nice time to say that Steve Purdy, who is here, Steve, is actually putting together a compendium of Greylock tunes on vinyl, which will be out
sometime in the spring.
sometime in the spring.
And you have never
So Merl and vinyl.
earlier, but the vinyl plants are so backlogged with all the major artists now went to do vinyl that we're going the back corner. So it's all been approved, it sounds fabulous.
And we were shocked that on eBay, they're selling the records, there's psychedelic collectors around the world with compendiums. YouTube, there's videos that people have done of this music. It's just quite flattering to Merl's talent.
Wonderful. And now, so first of all, I'm very grateful for all of you who spoke about that period of Merle's life. You know, it's a rich and remarkable period, and I'm very glad to Sam and Bill and all of you, Larry, wonderful stories. And sorry Steve couldn't be with us. The second one is the University of Arizona, the Daily Wildcat, the Citizen. Again, Aaron will lead us off, and then we will have some speakers.
Thank you, Tim. So in a couple of minutes, I want to give you just an overview of that period of time. A lot of us were at the University of Arizona trying to escape the draft or get an education or both. And Merl became, among other things, a copy editor for the paper. He also, for the Arizona Daily Wildcat, he also was involved very much, as we'll see later, in the Invisible Theater. He also took on jobs at the Daily Star of the Citizen, etc., as copywriter and as music critic. And here we see a comment that was in one of the papers, I forget the time, but when he was music critic, typical Merl, no job is more useless than writing one's personal opinion reviews for a performance that has already left town. And so, you know, again, Merl had multiple dimensions to his talent, and he applied them in different ways. Here's, again, in the director's cut, there's many, many pages of compliments about Merl's talents and his contributions, etc. And what we'd like to do now is pass it back. This is our briefest trailer version to have the actual testimonials and remembrances for this session.
And I'd like to start off with Frank Rizzo, who wrote one of the most lovely, there are many extraordinary obituaries written at his passing, and one of them, the best in my mind, is Frank Rizzo.
Sometimes words fail, but let me try anyway. One of my favorite Merl Regal moments was when he appeared on Oprah Winfrey's show in support of the documentary Wordplay. When Oprah remarked about his dazzling mind, "You must be really smart," she told him. Merl simply said, "I know a lot of baloney." It was a typical Merl remark, unexpected, self-effacing, and playful, which is what he was like as long as I knew him, some 45 years. But Merl's response was a little baloney too. Merl knew so much about everything, could do so many things. Well, Oprah was right, as always. He was really smart and much more. Merl and I met on the staff of the Arizona Daily Wildcat in the early 70s, and his mind was a thing of legend even then. He loved language, wrote dazzling headlines, and he created what he called puzzles, hip, clever, and contemporary crossword puzzles for a new generation of word lovers. The English language, he once told me, is like this circus that we just play in every day. After the documentary came out, in which Merl was a big scene stealer, he became a kind of puzzle rock star, with fans rushing to the stage after he gave one of his talks or book signings. And his celebrity status grew even more so. He dazzled Ted Koppel on Nightline. He was cartoonized on The Simpsons. His fans included President Clinton, Jon Stewart, Stephen Sondheim, and a young man who proposed to his girlfriend through a puzzle Merl created just for that purpose. He attended their wedding, too. Merl constructed his life the same way he created his puzzles, independently, in an unorthodox manner, and with the playful spirit of a kid who was forever at recess. "I'm called a constructor," he once said, "although I like the sound of puzzle composer better. Or maybe even something adorable like Doctor of Letters." In the world of sometimes anonymous puzzle making, the, yes, adorable Merl had a deep and personal relationship with his fans who connected with his distinct voice, just as they would any favorite author, singer, or poet. You knew a Merle Regal puzzle immediately. Its wise guy voice, its ticklish sense of gotcha, its ability to make you think and laugh and think some more. And like any great artist, he made you see things in new ways by showing that language is a fascinating and glorious thing that can be looked at and stretched and played with and explored in infinite ways. His theme puzzles are classics. To this day, I can't look at a theater marquee without thinking of his movies that shouldn't be shown together puzzle. One of the many answers, driving Miss Daisy nuts. Or the theme of the puzzle called Lesser Known One-Named People in History. Merl clued, he said the future was so close I can smell it. The answer, Nostradamus. Merl once said, what's witty to some is nitwitty to others, but at least there would be a psychic mini reward of a light bulb going off when you got the answer. And even the most traditional crossword players had to tip their hats and bow to the sheer virtuosity of his legendary gridlock puzzle. Names of cars went across and down and interlocked in the middle, said Merle when he described it to me. And there was one three-letter word going down that crossed all the car names, and that was N-A-V, which was an overturned van, which was causing the gridlock. But wordplay was just one aspect of his many talents. He was a writer, performer, musician, a composer. He wrote the music for a play of mine, Stained Glass, that was produced at the U of A Theater Department, and it was as complex, mesmerizing, and as perfect as his puzzle. The last time he visited me this spring, Bill, my husband, had a keyboard, and he played the entire theme from memory 45 years later. After college, he had a stint in LA as a writer for several game shows, but his course was set when he decided that he could indeed make a living by doing crossword puzzles if he and Marie did it their way. Traditionally, magazines and newspapers are notorious for their low, one-time only pay and its refusal to give credit to the constructors who made the puzzles. These publications and publishers then completely owned, recycled, and profited from the work. Merle and Marie did it differently. They instead self-published his puzzles, selling them to newspapers and magazines for a very modest fee and a tiny mention of his self-published puzzle collections available by purchase by mail and later on the web. This way, he could be the master of his own domain name. His Sunday puzzles ran in more than 50 papers, including the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Hartford Courant, where we reconnected in significant ways. His other Connecticut connection was through the National Crossword Puzzle Tournament that began in Stamford, Connecticut in the late 70s. On a larger stage, Merle was an absurdist with a practical streak, an anarchist who was also a classicist, and unlikely ringmaster who understood the importance of fun, surprise, and entertainment. That was something he learned from Margaret P. Farrar, who began editing the New York Times crossword puzzles in the 1920s, just a few years after the crossword puzzles were invented. Merle sent a puzzle to her in 1966 when he was 16, and he became the youngest person to have a puzzle in the New York Times. He was paid $10. I remember seeing them both at the tournament in Stamford in the late 70s. She was quite elderly and very dear, and I could tell that he adored her and the affection was mutual. And I wondered if the relationship with her evoked the one he had with his own grandmother, whose lap Merl would sit on when he was a boy, reading together from her lap from her 1919 Webster's New International Dictionary. True. At 65 this year, Merl was working on all cylinders and busier than ever in the puzz biz, as he would say, along with the ever-patient, ever-steady, and ever-loving Marie, who ran the entrepreneurial business side of Merl, Inc. I joked about making wordplay a musical. Merl wasn't joking. Believe it or not, I actually wrote 6 or 7 ideas for great songs. It would work, I can see it. Well, if Merl saw it, then I did too. I once asked him what he would like his last puzzle to be if he ever retired. It would be a trick puzzle that you could solve normally, he said, but if you figured out all the clues in a different way, they would lead you to $10,000 that I would bury someplace. It would be very elegant once you solved it, if you solved it. And I would never reveal the answers, he said. Well, it would have been a doozy. Just like Merl, no baloney.
That was lovely, Frank. Thank you very much. Rich Dilworth, Jay Parker, who was the editor when Scott and I and Merl were on the paper, was dying to come, and just had too many. He had some things going on with his health, and he couldn't make it. And he wrote something which, and also Renee Monroe, but that's it. Also was unable to come. So Rich Drillworth is going to read these for us. Are you there, Rich? Who was also, of course, on the Wildcat.
Now, Jay was the editor-in-chief during Merle's time at the Wildcat, and he couldn't be here today, but he did email these memories. I don't pretend that Merle and I were personally close. Frankly, I was a little too much in awe. Point of fact, all you guys scared me more than just a little. He was smart, funny, and immeasurably talented, and I can never remember a day at the office without Merle laughing. And they weren't the kind of easy, barely post-juvenile laughs we were all still susceptible to. Even Merle's laugh required a higher, more complex level of humor. My favorite example, one I often revisit, is Merle sitting at the copy desk and laughing while reciting entire chunks of movie dialogue. To begin with, this was no easy task in the days before IMDb and VCRs. Merle would run through entire chunks of Jules Feiffer's incredibly rich Carnal Knowledge screenplay as directed by the great Mike Nichols. All right, where the fuck is my shoehorn? This place is a mess. There's not any food in the house. Half the time you look like you fell out of bed. You spend more time in bed than any other human being past the age of 6 months that I ever heard of. That's a poor substitute. I mean, Merle really had Nicholson down. He could go through the entire scene and get not just all the lines, but all of Nicholson's nuance. Who does that at 20 entirely from memory? It's an odd memory, I know, but one of the richest and most lasting from those years. It's also why coming across his puzzles years later was like falling back into a conversation with an old friend. To call Merle memorable requires a richer, fuller appreciation of the word. My love and respect to all. Jay Parker. And this too from Renee Monroe, who at the time was Renee Calderon, one of the reporters at the Wildcat with Jay and Merle. I have a small anecdote about Merle to contribute, even though I still find it embarrassing after all these years. I came into the office one day wearing a new top I was fond of because it had an embroidered pear on the front of it. Now, maybe I was a naive sophomore and Merle was just being Merle, but the first words out of his mouth in a deadpan voice were, "That's a nice pear." I'm embarrassed just typing that, but I'm also still laughing at it, and I never ever forgot that scene.
So I would like to ask, Kit, you around? Okay, we are going to make a photograph of all of us here. And so I'm going to ask Kit to come up. He's going to come up, stand up here with my camera and take a photograph of us. I think, let's try it.